What sound does silence make? Listen. Now, some of you might have found that quite hard. I know I do. Every time somebody asks me to listen for silence, I suddenly start hearing noises that I didn't realize were there before. Or I hear my stomach rumbling, reminding me that once again I've forgotten a meal. Or worse still, there's a voice in my head which keeps saying, Laura, stop thinking and just listen. The truth is, when we're asked to listen and listen for silence or to silence, it's really quite hard. Because silence is very rarely truly silent. The world we live in is a busy, noisy place. And in this busy, noisy world, where do we put our efforts? What do we focus on? What do we do first? Even trying to make a decision about what to focus on is really hard. The pressure to act and act quickly can be really overwhelming. And it's really easy for us to think that we can't do anything until we have more information to help us make that decision, so that we can be sure about what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. More information, more data, more evidence. But what if we didn't have to know anymore? What if I was to tell you we already have all the information we need to make a decision and to impact the world, making it better for ourselves, our families, our communities, and even the whole world? If we just stop and listen. We've just come out of COVID-19. March 2020 was the start of the lockdown in the UK. Do you remember that? The world was much more silent, and we were able to stop and listen. Do you remember what that was actually like in lockdown? In the stillness and the quiet of COVID-19, something happened. We were able to hear our world, our society as it really is. What was that like for you? I know for me, living in the middle of Sheffield in the north of England, we heard songbirds in the city. Wild animals, deer, actually came walking down High Street. And on a more personal note, I discovered things about the community and the area that I lived in that I'd never seen before. Shops that sold the most delicious cakes. Places where you could get fresh mango in Sheffield in March. Who'd have thought? But we also heard more distressing sounds. We heard about the increase in domestic violence. We heard about the levels of poverty just around the corner. And we realized that when we moved into this online world as the answer to all our problems, there were many children and families who didn't have Wi-Fi to work from home and to keep going, and didn't even possibly have computers to do so. You see, silence is rarely truly silent. Silence speaks, always. I first discovered the power of silence during the last global pandemic. Yet, I'm old enough to have lived through two. The AIDS pandemic that began in the 1980s had a massive impact. It's 1989, and I'm a specialist AIDS nurse working in the community, and it's overwhelming. Days, nights, and moments spent with the dying, the despairing, and the hopeful. Many, many silent hours trying to make sense of a silent threat. One which revealed a very different world to me every day. A world in which partners who'd lived in loving relationships for years were denied the time together in the last few moments of life. One in which families denied that very same surviving partner the right to attend the funeral to see their loved one safely through. And one in which people had to hide the most important parts of their identity for fear of reprisal, and where people actually had their houses firebombed because somebody thought they belonged to one of the 5 risk groups that we'd all been persuaded actually existed. The world that was revealed to me in those silent spaces between what was reported in the news and what we read in the newspaper was one which was always just out of earshot for the majority. Overlooked, unspoken, silent, or silenced. This had a very profound effect on me, and actually I learned a lot in that time. The most important thing was that my everyday world that I knew, and the people I worked with did too, was one which was never really spoken about outside of our area of work. And the more the silence persisted about the impact and the experiences of people that I saw every day, the louder that silence became, until it screamed. In every missing headline, in every half-truth, and in every unspoken experience of people, families, and communities living with and through AIDS. And that's when I learned to stop and listen. And take notice of the things that were not said or could not openly be said as the world continued to turn. This had a profound effect on me and led me years later to pursue a PhD, to try to find a way to evidence their existence. And through listening to their voices, I developed a new methodology, the Silencers Framework, a way to liberate the untold stories and the silenced voices of the unheard. The Silencers Framework is based on my realization that in our lives, in the noise of what we take to be reality, there's often a disconnect between what's reported to us, what we do, and what somebody else does. For example, researchers have used the framework to explore the experiences of living with the dual stigma of HIV and TB in Brazil. They've spoken to young men from gangs in prison who are suffering from sight loss, and the fear with which they daren't talk about their illness or seek any help because of the vulnerability it will reveal within them. Or women with a history of FGM, giving birth for the first time in the UK, and walking that tightrope between motherhood, legitimacy, fear of reporting, and a label of criminality. Because in that silence, that loud, deafening, screaming silence, we hear the world that we actually have, what works and what doesn't, and how the choices we make and the rules that are set impact all aspects of our society and all people. The Silencers Framework allows us to hear the unheard screams of our society and of ourselves. By listening to silence, we are empowered to have more information around what we could do, where we could put our efforts, based on all the information that's right there in front of us. Always in earshot, but often unheard. If you truly want to make a difference, impact the world and have different outcomes, I would encourage you to be aware of what is missing, silenced, or unspoken from your view of the world. We're surrounded by data, and every data point tells a story. It speaks of a life, a person, a reality. And between those numbers, in the silent spaces, are the untold stories, with all the information we require to make a decision. One thing I've learned in my 40 years in healthcare is that we pretty much all do the same thing, even though we may approach it differently. There are few conditions that are not universal. After all, we're all human. The silences framework challenges us to be curious about what is not being said. If 40% of the population do X, what do the other 60% do? And why is there a silence around their experience? The stories in those silences are constantly telling us what we could be, what we could achieve, and the impact we could have. So the answer to the question, where do we put our efforts, and the opportunities related to that are always there, if we know how to hear them and we take the time to do it. Shh. Do you hear that? Thank you.